volatile on the side of losing. So to protect the mental state, I feel like is a byproduct of being humble enough to admit what you're capable of with the quality of your exploits. So for a player who's just learning, yes, I understand that he's sacrificing value by not trying to maneuver through spots that I might be able to maneuver through, but the simplified process that I give him is the safest for him at his current context. So again, I think the theme of this lesson is sort of becoming like how to see how there's multiple truths and multiple, like certain things are healthy for you depending on what paradigm you're currently at. I've related it before to that idea about having a volume goal once you identify that you're avoiding playing. Yes, you might play your B minus game, but it's more important that you can prove to yourself for 1 month that you can play 75,000 hands in a month, and then you rebalance. Playing from your A game after you prove that. Like at some point, sacrifices need to be made to balance certain aspects of your mental game or technical game, which are kind of the same thing. Um, so yeah, depending where you are on that scale of where you're imbalanced, one thing could be healthy for one guy that's completely unhealthy for another guy. It really depends where they're at in their development. Did I get disconnected, guys? Or it's back up? Yeah, let me re-summarize that end part. Um, Everybody can hear now, right? Okay, let me do it even better. So pretend that if I give you a simple piece of advice, which is always fold rivers versus aggression when you hold a bluff catcher, that's that works like 80% of the time in situations. I'm just pulling a number out of my ass, but let's pretend that that's efficient at sort of like an 80% frequency or something. So you know that by applying that, you're automatically leaving 20% of your EV on the table by not doing anything more advanced. The problem is if at an intro level you attempt to get that extra 20% EV, you're going to fuck up the implementation of it and go on mental tilt frequently enough that you're actually going to do worse than just taking the simplified approach. So where I might be able to squeak out that extra 20% because my context is advanced enough to know, okay, on these texture runouts it's better to bluff, or versus this player profile, on this texture runout it's better to bluff catch. I know certain things that he doesn't know in terms of sensitivity to intricacies. So for me, it makes sense to operate from the liberty of trying to extract all of that EV, but for him, it's actually reckless to try to extract that extra 20%. So depending on what level a student's context is at, certain things are healthy that wouldn't be healthy for a player at another context. It wouldn't be healthy for me to take the overall simplified approach because my potential is higher than that because I've integrated deeper understandings about sort of textural dynamics and just every part of the game. Um, so, and I said that's sort of becoming the theme of this one is that it's important to see how there are multiple truths depending on what current paradigm or context you're operating from. The overall goal in any sort of learning process and in life in general is to increase the capacity of, I don't even want to use the word capacity. The overall goal is to increase the flexibility of your paradigm. By increasing the flexibility of your paradigm, you naturally will expand to more inclusive paradigms. And from more inclusive paradigms, your capacity for implementing high level exploits, bringing it back to poker now, actually becomes more possible. Like your capacity is higher. Um, so yeah, it's almost like what seven was just saying. Like it's almost this simple, and no one wants to hear it. But like you guys are calling away so much money on the river. Like I told Brian this in a lesson the other day. I made a note that I didn't I, Brian? say I make sure that I mention this in the stream on the crawl. Yeah, I wrote this down. And I think I said this to Brian in the session, like verbatim. I said, do you realize that there's spots that you're calling stacks off on the river where guys are bluffing like literally between 0 and 5% of the time? And so, like, in the session we looked at with Brian, I think he spewed off like 2 or 3 full buy-ins in a spot where I literally think the guy's bluffing frequency in this exact spot might have been like 5% or less. And it happened because he got into an over theory oriented approach where he didn't see that the guy was repping much and he lost vision over the more relevant data points. But like the point is, you save a buy-in per session, that's your whole career. Like your entire career is predicated on one buy-in per session. So the point I made after the session was like, oh, this is almost like a joke that up until your context is advanced enough, no session, no lesson that you enter should be focused on almost anything except doing the 30-second exercise on rivers. Because guys don't understand how much money they're punting, how much win rate they're punting when they make literally a negative 50 to 60 BB call off on the river. And I mean, after you factor in how much he was bluffing under the optimal frequency, that's the net loss of your call. So like you're putting $80 into a pot and 60 of it is just you're lighting it on fire. Like that's how imbalanced his bluffing frequency is in some of these spots that I see guys arguing for bluff catches. So it got me thinking like, okay, in order to prioritize the relevance of a player's win rate, he has to get on board with the fact that it's the river spots that need to be really pressed out and cleaned up. And you see guys fucking talking about, should I open pocket deuces on the small blind and start calling 3 bets with low pocket pairs? And then coming from the understanding that I have of where all the money is being burned, like you've got to understand how silly that looks. And again, I'm not saying this in any way to try to discourage guys from looking in other directions or making you feel like you've been wasting your time, but speaking strictly from a position of win rate efficiency. When there's this much imbalance going on in the pools and guys are still arguing for theory-oriented bluff catches on rivers, I feel like it's my responsibility to just be like, something has to change. If you want accelerated growth, you have to start prioritizing the spots where your win rate is actually plummeting. Mako said, didn't you say we could be like a monster winner just by playing the river well, though? I think that probably is something I would have said. Does that mean just hitting all the sweet V-bets then the others miss? I would say that's the very minimal aspect of it. I would say it's all about making all of the sweet folds that no one else is capable of. In order to start making really great folds, you have to trust yourself. In order to trust yourself, you have to be backed up with something that's more than just assumption. Otherwise, you'll know that you can't be trusted. So, in a way, it's like the perfect bridge for the over-analytical player is to learn to trust through higher integration of database study. That's why I think the night vision pack is going to be sort of the breakout pack in terms of like guys really starting to understand what I'm all about, what I've been preaching for like probably going on the last 10 months or so. The reason that I've been unable to connect with a portion of the demographic, a very big portion of the demographic, is that there are players who are so stuck in the theory-oriented mentality that they will not be able to get on board the exploitative train until it's bridged in a theory-oriented context. So hear me here, because this is like subtle, but like very, I think, important to like reaching, to bring the community to the critical mass where people can actually board this bridge and walk across it. You have to make it fit the context of the theory-oriented player. There's a certain amount of reverse engineering in content that has to be sort of thought out in that sense. How do you get someone who's over-analytical and very numbers-oriented and very theory-oriented to cross the bridge of starting to play more exploitatively? Well, you have to speak to them in terms of numbers. So the night vision pack is very data-oriented, but the bridge that we create is that, okay, guys, all of this shit is plotted, you have all the numbers that you want, and now it's literally staring you in the face that the theory-oriented approach is incentivized very, very rarely, and you're using it very, very often. So once they see that, I think someone asked before, how necessary is it to really arrive at futility? in order to make real change, it's less and less necessary once you see that the avenue that you're going down is not actually benefiting your end goal. I'm assuming most of these guys are in poker to make more money. There's some guys who are doing it because they enjoy theory, and I mean, that's all good. It's your preference. But if you're approaching buying a pack or software from a position of, I hope this improves my win rate a lot, then I think there's no question that, like, when you're staring at the numbers showing you that there's some other way to make money more quickly than how you've been doing it, that's the point where your stubbornness sort of drops and you're more on board with jumping ship on the theory context and crossing the bridge because you actually see how it benefits you, and there's like an immediate benefit. You get what you wanted by crossing this bridge, and it's okay because you didn't have to sacrifice your context to do it. When I did this abruptly and I just started the intuitive learning process like sort of cold turkey, coming off like reaching futility and total exhaustion with a theory oriented approach, that to me felt like ripping off a band-aid, because I left my paradigm very quickly. Like, think about like literally pushing off from shore, no paddles. That's what it felt like. But if you can, this is what I think good training is supposed to do. It's a marketing aspect too, where like you have to hit the demographic from their own way of seeing life or reality. You have to make it make sense for them. And I think night vision is going to do that. And I think it's like, I didn't realize this until like a month or two back, but that's what I was really missing from the scaling of the PO pack into the mental game pack. Like, night vision is going to be the pack that sort of, I hope, brings a whole new wave of theory oriented guys over the bridge by speaking their language. Let's take a look at this one. Okay. So we're on the big blind here at 122 BBs deep, but we are 100 effective versus the UTG opener. Defend King Jack on the big blind. Check raising flop. I think it's okay as a mix, especially with the diamond. Using the 1/3 turn bet, I think it makes a good deal of sense. And now he raises turn. This is where I fold. Let's see your analysis. Fold on the turn or on the river. Villain is a reg, not too aggro. Seems to have a low fold versus check raise on the flop. So these three data points are something that I already assumed in the mass database analysis. What's happening here is your analysis of him is sort of fitting the average environmental trend, which is going to happen more often than not because the way we get environmental averages is by averaging all the players. So the reason this is a turn fold is that he's UTG, for one, making his initial pre-flop range as strong as it will ever be. We're check raising. You gave us the data point that he has a, oh, you said he has a low fold versus check raise on the flop. Okay, so that's where I guess you got your call from. I think I would still override it by saying that just because someone doesn't fold the flop a lot doesn't mean that they're going to have an abundance of floats from the UTG position here, and it also doesn't mean that they start raising the turn aggressively. Like, those two things, and this is sort of like an application of Bayesian, that like it's very easy to see, it's very easy to mix up when you see that he floats flop a lot potentially, that now means you should defend more aggressively versus turn raises, especially when he's UTG, because in UTG he's going to have probably less floats to begin with here. I know he can still float like stuff like king queen off and all that shit, so you have a point there, but it by no means means, it by no means indicates that he's the type of player who's raising turn aggressively. So unless I had a better read, I'm just bet folding the turn, knowing that this raise doesn't come in this raise doesn't come in with a bluff at a high enough frequency, especially versus your sizing, which offers pretty good pot odds to any flush draw, overcard gutter. I'm not saying that like king queen can't raise here. I'm just saying, knowing what I know from the pools, it's not common to see raises come in frequently enough here. And then the other thing is, um, this is more of a confidence interval type reasoning. But if someone is starting to go after your small bet on the turn because they think it's capped, and then you bet call, a portion of that interval is going to continue to pressure you on the river. Like they've already made their mind up. So I guess the real thing is here is that like calling to fold turn seems like a pretty volatile, risky option. Calling to fold river, calling turn to fold river seems pretty risky because realize how exploitable that is versus the guy who decided at the point of his turn raise that he's going to try to barrel you off the hand in a multi-street bluff line. So basically what that compresses into is that I really feel like you're not getting to free showdown often enough on the river by calling the turn versus the overall interval. And it's because overall I don't think that they're bluffing too much, and I think they're following through at decent frequencies. So those two things sort of merged. Why are we I wonder why we're, maybe it's because I have Skype open. Maybe that'll help. So yeah, I bet fold this. And that's my standard line, and like it's very, I would almost never bluff catch in this line in a vacuum. And I'd have to have really good reads on a villain before I called a raise. And if I did call a raise, I think most of the time I would be stacking off to a river bet. But that's like a really rare instance for a player profile like that I would be able to justify that. What's the bottom of your range for entering the pot versus a raise first in from an ultra passive fish? I'm trying to find spots where my thinking process is clearly wrong, and this one could be one of them. That's a cool way to start a post. I'm assuming in this spot, middle position's range is way ahead of mine, but I don't know. I could overvalue in ranges in general. I could be too nitty overall. Help me. Middle position is playing 64-5 over 43 hands. This means he raised 2 times only. We have behind 2 other fishes, but let's say we don't care about them. The question is, are you entering the pot either with a call or a 3-bet versus middle position? If not, what's the worst hand you enter with? I think I'm just folding, because although a fish will have a tendency to misplay post flop, the tighter a fish's pre-flop range is, the harder it gets for him to misplay post flop. So it's an important distinction. This is not how you go. You don't splash around pre-flop trying to exploit guys who play very, very nitty pre-flop ranges. The way that you beat those guys is by running them over with aggression in small ball pots, like raising first in too wide. There is no way to actively exploit someone who gets to the flop with a very strong range, because even a bad player can defend at good frequencies when he pushes so much equity on any average flop. So it's not a big part of my game at all, and this is why when the environment is 3-betting something from the big blind like 9 or 10% and I'm on the button, I'm playing really, really tight call versus 3-bet, and then I'm not messing around post flop much at all because I know that there's no real hot spots available for me versus a range that is doing so well on the average flop. So this was a good thing to train out of your context. If you have this rigid belief that like, oh, we need to be getting into pots with fish, that's true to a degree, but only with hands of certain equity distribution. Like the type of hands that you should call here are probably like the suited connectors and pocket pairs. I would expand with those first, and then nut flush draws. And only because you can expect him to misplay overpairs or overplay his overpairs when you complete those draws and get paid too often. But for the most part, trying to expand with like reverse implied odds hands, like a hand like King Jack versus a really nitty opening range, is a formula for losing. Um, it's just the wrong way to try to go about exploiting a fish. But if you come from a context of like, oh, I want to play in pots with fish, I should be able to expand my value range versus fish. That's true up until a point where the fish doesn't raise enough preflop. Like at the point at which his preflop range is tight enough, you can't fuck with him. Like period. There's just not going to be enough opportunity post flop. What you can do is choose the different types of distributions of flatting hands that have a little bit more merit, like using the suited connectors and the pocket pairs. But the king jack is definitely a fold. So to answer this question, I would say that I would call all pocket pairs, and then I might start calling like hands like 8-7 suited, 9-8 suited a little bit more aggressively if I thought that their implieds were higher. Dimitri asks, which package would you suggest for guys like me, micro stakes, not good players? Night Vision or PO Unlocked? I think they have I think they have different strengths. The advantage of PO Unlocked is it gets you very familiar with understanding how simplified, well-balanced strategies can be derived from PO solver exploration, and it also gives you the tools to use PO very relevantly to guide your independent learning pattern from there. To me, I still think that's like invaluable. In other words, the work I did in PO solver that eventually led to me making the PO Unlocked pack is like a standalone pillar of my current context. Like it is the root or foundation of my context, that I understand equilibrium quite well from all the gribs I looked at. I understand how node locking trends work. I understand certain aggregation reports at a higher level of depth than most guys. And then that sort of, and I understand how I simplified the easy one strategic option strategies from one paradigm up, which actually saw that it's not just simple for the sake of easy, it's simple for the sake of practicality, preventing us from spewing in other spots where we already were, and combined with that, a mental game protection. And the fourth most important is that it actually maximally exploits most of the players in the pool when we use stuff like 1/3 c-bet sizing, which was a big part of the PO Unlocked pack. So it hits on all four of those fronts. And if you were to look at it just in terms of, well, Nick just uses like this 1/3 c-bet option because it's easier, that doesn't quite capture everything that it sort of accomplishes. One of the biggest reasons that I think the 1/3 is something that most players should adopt is like wait till you see when the night vision pack comes out that like the guys that check back flop and then fold to a turn stab, which is a very frequently occurring line after you're the pre-flop raiser, the pool deviation at small stakes Nomad Poker Stars, just for example, so 200 NL Poker Stars is like the fold frequency versus stab after the in position player misses the c-bet is over 20% higher than what PO Solver would defend versus stab. You see something like that, and then it becomes very, very funny almost. It's not funny, but it kind of is, that everyone in forums has resistance to adopting a one strategic option, 1/3 c-bet strategy because they believe it's so important that they play a check back range. When if I pull the data up, guess what, guys? You're overfolding 20% too often when you face a stab. So if you showed someone something like that and you're like, hey, bud, odds are you're one of these guys that is massively overfolding, then it's very easy to sacrifice the current model you come from, which is to play a check back range, because you've just gained an awareness that you play it like shit. The other alternative is you just try to get better at it and start defending more. That's cool too. But my point is that something like PO really exposes from a bunch of different angles how simple does not mean easy. Simple can be orchestrated from higher contexts, compressed and integrated into a lower context so that you're saving mental energy while gaining accuracy simultaneously. That was the real value that I saw in that pack, was like it played on multiple layers that it might be like misunderstood for some time in terms of being considered too simple, but for anyone who went the full distance with pack 1 and 2, I really felt like they would feel as though they had just been sort of like trained up from someone at a higher context. Like that's really what I was going for, is like how to lace the noob context with some sort of I call it lacing. Like if you lace a drug with something that's more another intense drug. I know it's a weird example, but for instance, if you lace a marijuana cigarette with cocaine, there's a much more intense effect that occurs. That's how I wanted the student to sort of feel when he smoked the PO Unlocked pack. Like, oh, it seems simple, but whoa, look where that knowledge came from. It came from way up here, and it was actually hitting on four different angles of intelligence that realized that there was things going on that the environment was incentivizing that should gear us toward playing simplified strategic options. It was protecting me from my own imbalances. It was gearing me toward the most incentivized exploits in terms of exploiting the pool, all that stuff. I've never smoked a cigarette laced in cocaine, by the way, but I have done DMT, which is probably even more intense. I love it. No, you should not do cocaine unless you're going to use it like responsibly in a spiritual setting. Doesn't seem like that type of drug though. 10 minutes left. What do you guys want to do? Guess I've missed some questions, so I'll scroll back up. Johnny C said, I've seen Tyler Forrester's video about 3-betting in position, and he said that to 3-bet low suited connectors versus fishy guys with the low fold C-bet is a losing play. Do you agree with this? Yes, but it also depends on how their turn and river defense frequencies are. Like, the thing that could blow that out of the water is if you run a mass database study that shows that they fold the turn substantially too much even after they defend flop a lot, which I think is definitely is a portion of the profile, but I don't know if it happens often enough for you to just like sort of launch in with that type of strategy right away. So I think yes, for the most part, I would agree with that, but I feel like we could do more database analysis to try to poke holes in it and see if we could go one step further with the exploit. Because if the fish is playing way too many hands, if he's not the type of guy that's going to fold way too many hands, there's probably a hotspot post flop where we could exploit him. We just have to figure out where the breaking point in his range is. So do I agree? Yes. And I feel like if we had the right database tools, we could even go further. Yeah, and I agree with what Seven said that I would prefer calling those hands because the value comes from the deeper SPR. Like that's where they stand to make a lot more mistakes too versus our exact hand. Let's end on this one. Lost value preflop showing huge strength. UTG is a loose aggressive reg. He opens 20% UTG and folds versus 3 bets 60%. MP is tight aggressive. If I 4-bet, I'm repping a very narrow range. At the same time, middle position could not find a fold with queen, queen, and ace, king, so maybe my 4-bet could be called. Okay, so before I even look at the analysis, normally when I see preflop talk like this, that sort of is exploitative in nature, I think it usually is very susceptible to bias. Like the things that you think are going on, specifically this line, I'm only repping aces or king, or yeah, I'm only repping aces or kings since queens would flat in my spot. At the same time, they can't find a fold with queen, queen, ace, ace, king. Like all this stuff is speculation right now. So let's just look. So basically, the question is coming into like, what is the best way to play in a cold four bet spot where I guess two considerations are you don't want to play a face up cold call range, and at the same time you want to maximize with every hand that you could possibly get it in profitably with right now. I think I lean toward playing a four bet or fold strategy here. And it's because I think I have such a high confidence that the five bet is never coming in light in this formation. The more confidence that you have that you'll never be exploited if you four bet fold a hand like jacks, the more confidence you have that you can play four bet fold at a higher EV than just playing the initial cold call. Basically because you know you'll never be exploited, and the overall bluffing frequency that the villains are using is probably, well, that's why you can't be exploited, because they're not bluffing enough. So if you have these vacuum type reads like that, yeah, it can be really helpful to cold four bet like a range of ace king, ace queen suited, pocket jacks through pocket aces. With your exact hand, I would say you have more than enough reason to just four bet and call off. And it doesn't have to contradict what I said about them only. Like I still think your range gets in very well against queens, ace king, kings, and aces. Like where the vision is contracted here is that yes, you get to play a wider range when you cold call, but you also go to the flop out of position versus two guys in a spot where you could have got it in pre-flop pushing equity. So while you're looking at, well, yeah, they might fold some worse hands, I'm looking at like in terms of examining the two lines relative to each other, I see more value in just getting it all in out of position because I'm focused in on the ace king portion of his range. Like that's really and the pocket queens, obviously. Those are the key aspects of his range that we basically gain all of our incentive to get it in pre-flop with. So you have to realize every time you flat, you're getting diminished returns on his ace king and pocket queens, and you probably still get stacked versus aces pretty consistently. This is more of a simplified way of thinking about it. But like when you think about going out of position versus two players very frequently on the flop in a 3-bet pot where you could have got equity in pushing pre-flop, I think that's generally an intuitive enough guideline to justify 4-bet calling off. It'd be much more interesting, I think, if we had queens, because now we aren't really pushing equity to 4-bet call off, and I think we could probably still find a 4-bet fold if we had a high enough confidence that nobody was 5-betting over our cold 4-bet with jacks. If we knew that they would only 5-bet a range of ace, king, kings, and aces, I think we could still fold with queens, or we'd be like almost very close to indifferent. So here I would say that you're just going to 4-bet and call off. What's the... Can you clarify that thing you just said, X1? In which line are you talking about that we're getting stacked at all times? It's kind of an interesting hand. Yeah, I would 4-bet fold the ace king. I wish we had poker stove, even though I told everybody to delete it. Because when ranges are well defined enough, it's almost just like a program like that becomes really useful. I would guess like ace king suited is still negative EV, and then I would guess that queens does a little bit better, and then kings is like a clear 4-bet get in. Like one way of thinking about this, guys, I know the removal factor is a lot when you have like aces or kings, but like if you had ace jack, would you be cold 4-bet bluffing and feeling confident about it? If not, that probably means there's a good deal of value to be gained from just cold 4-betting kings. Again, I'm trying to put this into a simpler context because unless we have perfect range clairvoyance, it's going to be very hard to put the right inputs into a poker stove equation or something like that. X1 said, I mean, you said in that spot with queen queen, it's the same. You 4-bet, get it in, and just call. Because you get stacked post flop, if so, with aces, kings anyway. Oh no, I meant that about king king. I meant to say that if we have pocket kings, we can get it in versus queen queen pre. And if we go post flop, we're probably still getting stacked by aces, because I don't think you can get off kings as easily as you can get off queens. But I do agree with you that if you flat the queen queen, you can make more post flop accurate folds. What do you use if you don't use poker stove? I definitely think, by the way, queen queen is like not a 4-bet call off in the environments today, unless you're playing in like really aggro games where people are 5-bet bluffing enough, or like merge 5-betting with jacks. I think queen queen would have to be a 4-bet fold still, and in that case, it's hard to say whether or not you would just choose to flat it or 4-bet it out of position. I don't think you can find the right answers to this stuff unless you have perfect inputs. I was talking to Brian about this last night. These spots that people will fight over a lot in forums, there's no reason to fight over them because we need the inputs to prove things that we can never prove unless we have the mass database analysis to prove it, which we won't get when we can't have clairvoyance over the mass database reads. We could probably get close. But then again, when you're dealing with tiers of hands, maybe the cutoff, the jumps are not that close. Like maybe the difference between kings and queens is like night and day. The difference between ace king and kings is night and day. So like my simplified analysis of this was like would be like I would probably 4-bet everything that I was going to continue with pre-flop, and then I would only be 4-bet calling off with kings and aces. And I feel like that's a pretty simplified, safe assumption for the state of the games. See if I had any other announcements. Got Johnny C on the stream on Friday. Should be fun. Night Vision Pack construction is in full effect. I'm going to be releasing more sneak peeks as we keep going, trying to get more feedback from you guys on features that you want to sort of optimize it. Like I said, I really expect it to be a huge drop in the industry for people that want the highest quality like database organization out there. One thing I'm going to be doing, I guess I can announce this right now, I'm going to be facilitating a Bovada hand history merger, basically. I'm going to put a post up on my blog, but basically as a promotional thing for like the night vision pack, and just because I think it's time it gets done, and I just think in a way that no one really has taken it upon themselves to facilitate it yet, I'm going to be the one that facilitates it because I think I have enough of a following that I can get good results with putting up a post that says, hey guys, we're going to be merging Bovada databases, and then I'll give you all back the compiled database. Maybe it'll be 10 million hands when we're done with it. If you want in, you just have to send me 100,000 hands. That's your entry ticket. 100,000 hands or more. You can send it to support@pokerdetox.com. We're going to compile all of them, and then around the release of Night Vision, I will upload the final database to a Dropbox and add every single email that's submitted, and you can all download it from there. So it's a cool way. It's like a win-win type thing, the way I see it, or a non-zero sum game where everybody who contributes gets value out of it, and everybody who doesn't want any part of it can just stay out. I can't guarantee what the breakdowns are for the different limits because it's not going to be like a requirement. You can send any limit that you want. One thing that we need, Brian just reminded me, is that we're going to need the original hands. So I can't even tell you how to do that because I'm a noob on it. Brian's walked me through it in the past, but I'll make a more detailed post about it on the blog to try to describe exactly like what we need from you in terms of the exact type of hand history format. So I think that could be really cool. I think a lot of guys have been waiting for it for a while, and I think the main hang up for guys who play Bovada and want to get really deep into the mass database stuff is like, well, I don't have a database, and this is sort of the solution to that. So that post will go up probably by Friday, and we can start to compile from there, and I'll probably release the thing by end of January at the latest, assuming that we have like 10 million hands or more. Okay, I'll see you guys Friday. Johnny C will be in the hot seat. Hope you enjoyed crawl number 4. Talk to you next time.